Raindrop, drip, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Cooking up dope in the park pot.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Friday, which means it's the first haircut video. So, as you can see, I look a little crazy. I've got the GoPro on, and I have this set up specifically so that when I'm cutting on the mannequin, this camera here is zoomed really in to my hands, so you can see what exactly I'm doing, if I'm finding my guide, all of that. So I really wanted to give you guys a close-up view of the cutting line, how I'm angling my fingers, and all of that. So that's why I look ridiculous and I'm wearing the GoPro, in case you were like, what is that thing on his chest that he's wearing? That's what it is. So I've already shampooed my mannequin. Today, I think I would like to go over how to do just a blunt, basic haircut. Obviously, when the mannequins come, they don't have a one-length haircut. So I did already shampoo her, and we're gonna go through and do a quick one length. One thing I noticed working with students is that when we originally teach you how to do one-length haircuts, we teach you to take very small subsections. And that's because you're beginners at the time, and it's the best way for you to be able to make sure that your haircut is consistent. Once you're working with clients or guests on the floor or in a salon, you don't have the whole hour appointment to do the one length before you move into layering or graduating or whatever your other technique is that you're going to use. So you need to be able to do the basic one length haircut fairly quickly. So what I'm going to show you today is how I personally like to section out my guest's hair or my mannequin's hair when I'm going to do a simple basic one length haircut before I move into my layering or graduating or whatever else I'm going to do with the haircut. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so here I am standing behind my guest. This is where I would be standing behind the chair when I was getting ready to do a one-length haircut. You're seeing my right side right now, and I have a giant zit on my cheek, so enjoy that. It just showed up today, and I mean, of course it would, wouldn't it? So I've got the GoPro ready. It's aiming down to where my guide is going to be so that I can show you up close what I'm doing. So I'm going to start off by sectioning my guest's hair out. What I like to do when I'm doing a basic one-length cut is get my guest sectioned into 3 main sections. Now, you may need to alter this depending on the density of your guest's hair. As I said in the last video, we're going to create a guide, and if we take too much hair at the same time, we won't be able to see our guide. And if we can't see our guide, then we can't cut the hair. With mannequin hair, it's obviously not very dense, so I can take it in my 3 basic sections. If I were working on a guest who had really fine hair and maybe low to medium density, this is the 3 sections that I would use to do my basic one-length haircut. If I couldn't see my guide, then obviously I would take smaller sections. So what I like to do is go ahead, make sure my guest's hair is completely tangle free, and just go ahead and kind of comb everything back. I don't have a real mannequin stand. This is a camera stand that is just rigged to be a mannequin stand, so it's not the most stable thing in the world. With all the craziness going on, Amazon's quickest delivery time on a mannequin stand was April 21st, and obviously I didn't want you guys to wait that long to get some education, so we're just going to have to make do with what we have. Alright, so the first thing I like to do is go ahead and part my guests out at the parietal ridge all the way around the head shape. Now, when I part my guest's hair, I like to comb the hair in the direction that my comb is going to be moving, and then I like to put my comb flat against the head and bring it to where I need it and then separate the hair. This creates a much more even part than trying to go through holding your comb like a pencil and trying to separate the hair as you go. If you do that, it's not going to be as straight of a line. So I always like to comb my hair in the direction I need it to go, And then I like to run my comb just right against their scalp, separate where I need to separate, and I've got a nice even part. So I'm going to go ahead and part this all the way around her parietal ridge. Once I have my section like I would like it, I'm going to just twist the hair, and then of course I'm going to take a duckbill clip or an alligator clip, whichever you prefer. I prefer alligator clips, they hold hair better in my opinion, but once again, we're kind of just improvising today because a lot of my stuff is at the school or at the salon, and obviously I can't access it. So I went to Walgreens today and just bought some duckbill clips. That way I would at least be able to section the hair properly and make sure that you guys could see what I was doing. So this is my first section that I have created. The next thing I'm going to do is split my mannequin or guest's hair down the center in the back, so that I can access the occipital bone area. Now I'm going to take my comb and part my guest's hair out at the occipital area. Alright, so I'm done parting out my mannequin's head now. As you can see, I have 3 cutting sections. So I have my bottom section, which is everything from my occipital down. On the mannequin, obviously, I am putting the occipital kind of right here. It would be maybe a little bit lower on a real guest, but it's a mannequin, and mannequins tend to be a little bit, different. And then I have my middle section here, which is basically from my occipital all the way up to my parietal ridge. And then I have my top section, which is everything from the parietal ridge up. So this is the basic 3 sections that I like to use when I'm doing a 1-length haircut. So she's been shampooed, she's wet. Let's go ahead and start doing our 1-length haircut. Another thing I notice a lot with new hairdressers in particular is that they're not keeping the hair consistently wet. They take a little longer to do haircuts, which is totally fine when you're starting out, but you need to make sure that you're constantly getting the sections wet before you cut them. If the hair is really wet when you start your first section, but it's drying as you're moving along and you're not keeping it saturated, you're not getting the same tension on dry hair that you would be getting on wet hair. So make sure if you're slower at your haircuts, you're going through and saturating the hair and keeping it equally saturated with water for the cutting process. Alright, so now that I am about to get ready to start my first section, what I'm going to do is take about a 1-inch section in the center of my guest or mannequin head. So all this hair on either side, I'm not cutting at the moment because I'm going to create my guide right here in the center of my haircut. Now this is a 1-length haircut or 0-degree elevation haircut or blunt haircut. However you want to say it, it all means the same thing. So the goal here is to minimize the amount of elevation that I'm using on my guest's hair. If your guest has long hair and they're sitting in a chair, you either need to have them stand or you need to have them look forward because the chair is going to bump their hair out and that's going to cause unwanted elevation, which can affect the final result of your blunt cut. So I'm going to take my first section here and I'm going to pull it straight down. Here is where I'm going to be cutting. So my fingers are straight across and I am going in to cut. I'm going to stop right here at my second knuckle. You never want to cut past your second knuckle. So now I'm going to drop that and grab some hair from the other side here. I'm starting at the center and working my way out to the left. So I can see my guide right here, and I'm going to continue cutting with that guide, stopping at my second knuckle. All right, here's the guide here, so let's go in, and second knuckle, stopping. So here's what I've created so far. Now I'm going to move back to the center and work my way out to the right. here's my guide in the center here, so I need to match this hair to my guide. And pull out this hair now, coming in. I can clearly see my guide here. So now my occipital section is finished being cut. What I'm gonna do now is check for balance and symmetry. So I'm gonna grab hair from both sides and run my fingers down just to make sure that they're coming off at the same spot and that my hair is even. I don't have a mirror because I'm standing in the center and demoing for you guys, but you also really need a mirror when you're doing this. A mirror comes in handy. The mirror, believe it or not, isn't just there so that the guests can stare at themselves the whole time they're getting a hair service. The mirror is there so that you can see what you're doing from every single angle, because you need to know that in order to create a balanced haircut. So make sure you're utilizing your mirrors. I'm going to go ahead and pull down my second section, which is my occipital to parietal section. So I'm pulling this down. Now that I have my second section down, I'm going to do the exact same steps that I did for my first section. I'm going to start in the center and work my way to the left and then work my way to the right. I am not going to cut past my second knuckle, and I'm going to make sure that I can clearly see my guide before I make any kind of cuts on the hair whatsoever. So I'm going ahead and pulling down my first subsection that I'm going to cut. Now this is a mannequin, so as I said, they don't have very dense hair. I can easily see my guide right here. There's only a few stray hairs that are going to be coming off. So I can go ahead and remove those hairs. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm moving to the left and continuing with my haircut. Here's my guide. Now, in my last video, I mentioned doing a triangular shaped perimeter with round layers in the back and triangular layers in the front. So I am going to keep this perimeter more triangular, which means it'll be shorter in the back and get longer towards the front. The reason I'm going to do that is because the mannequin's hair is already shorter in the front than it is in the back, so it's not going to reach my guide and get cut anyway. So I'm just going to over direct all this hair from the front back to my guide back here, and if it falls out or doesn't reach my guide, I'm not going to be cutting it. It looks like a lot more reach than I thought it would, so maybe it will look slightly triangular shaped in the end. We'll see. So now I'm going back to the center and working my way out to the right. Again, if we don't see a guide, we don't cut anything. That's just how this works. That's how hair cutting works. You don't want to be cutting blind. So I can clearly see my guide here. Can see my guide. So now I've got my second section done. Again, I'm going to check for balance and symmetry, make sure that my mannequin is the same length on both sides. I'm using my sense of touch and I'm feeling. I can actually close my eyes and make my hands go evenly down and make sure they're coming off in the same spot. If I had a mirror, I'd be looking in my mirror and watching my fingers go down her hair so that I'm getting a visual and I'm feeling if it's even. Everything looks good, feels good, so we're going to go ahead and pull down our very top section and see if anything's coming off. It very well might not be. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my last two sections, which is start in the middle and work my way around to the front. And as you can see, it's literally just little baby hairs that are shedding off because it's a mannequin and it's brand new and hasn't been brushed or combed that much. So it's just little hairs that are not really secure that are coming out here. Everything is already pretty much the same length because I believe she had a few layers before I started cutting her. So there's not really anything that is coming off at this point. Alright, so here's my mannequin with her new one length haircut, which is feeling pretty even. It's the first time the mannequin has been cut, so I'm trying to preserve as much length as possible because I only ordered 2 mannequins and we have a lot of haircuts to go over, so I'm trying to keep her as long as possible. It didn't take off very much, in fact not very much of the top section at all, which is where some of this hair is coming from, so she may be a little scragglier on one side than the other, but that's okay. So that's how I do a basic one length cut. Now you're gonna do a basic one length cut before you do any kind of layering, any kind of graduation, anything like that. So that's a very quick way to go ahead and do your basic one length. If I'm doing a guest with a face frame, I always over direct everything to the back, which of course means I'm preserving length towards the front, but that doesn't matter because I'm gonna go in at the end and give them a face frame, which is gonna take all that length off, and it's gonna end up being a little bit shorter in the front and longer in the back in the end. And it's just quicker to me to do a one length where you're pulling everything back than when you're trying to go to the side and make sure that you're doing your one length. So I just go straight across the back, and then when I do my face frame, I take all that extra length that I preserved off. Remember, in hair cutting, you can always take more off, but you can't put it back on. So if you're unsure, make sure that you're cross-checking. Make sure that you're going back into your original sections and checking. If you see something that doesn't look right, don't just cut it off. There could be a reason. Maybe one side of the hair is drier than the other, so it has shrunk up a little bit. There are just many different reasons why something could look off. So don't automatically assume that you did something wrong and go in and make adjustments before you've cross-checked or gone back into your original subsections and checked your haircut, because that's a mistake a lot of people make when they're new and they keep cutting and cutting and cutting. One side looks longer than the other, so they cut it, then that side looks shorter, then they cut it, and before long your guest has ended up with a haircut that was a little bit shorter than what they wanted. And that's one of the main reasons I think why that happens. To me, she looked a little uneven at first, but I think it's because this side was a little drier, because now that both sides are drying, it's looking a lot more the same on both sides. So that's a perfect example of what I was just talking about, where I could have easily been like, oh, this side looks a little bit longer, let me take a little bit more off. And then as this side starts drying, it's like, oh, now this side is a little shorter. Now I need to take a little bit more over here. So always make sure there's not a valid reason for why it's looking a little off before you cut more off of their hair. Also, we can always make refinements after we've styled. Basic haircuts are the same for every person. You can do round layers on someone, or square layers on someone, or triangular layers on someone, and it's gonna look the exact same. Going in and texturizing after the hair is dry, that's where you're going in and doing all your detail work. That's where you're really customizing that haircut for that guest. If you work somewhere like Great Clips or someplace like that where they're all about getting people in and out, in and out, in and out, and you're not drying the hair, to me, that's not really a complete haircut. You can't accurately see what the hair is doing and make adjustments as necessary if you're not drying the hair completely and giving it some kind of style. Alright, so now that we've finished with our basic one length haircut, at this point we could go in and put layers in, we could go in and give some graduation, we could do whatever we want to do with this guest depending on what we discussed during the consultation. What I'm going to go ahead and do right now is style the mannequin out, because this is the only haircut that we're going to go over and physically do right now. Just a quick hot tip for you guys. If you're behind in the salon world, the best time to make up time is during the blow dry and style. The easiest way to do that is make sure that you rough dry your guest's hair, as I'm doing right now, until the hair is about 90% dry. Once the hair is 90% dry, grab your round brush, grab your paddle brush, and then get in there and do your detailed styling work. It'll save you a lot of time in the end, and when you're crunched for time because the haircut took a little bit longer than you thought it would, this is where you're gonna be able to make that up. Guys, I'm finished styling my guest or my mannequin's hair out. So this is my basic one length, blunt, 0 degree elevation cut. I did it in 3 simple sections. As I mentioned earlier, if your guest has a high density of hair, you may have to take slightly smaller sections, but you should be able to get through your one length cut fairly quickly so that you can go in and put in layers or whatever else you need to do for the haircut. I really hope that you enjoyed this demo part of the video. Coming up next in the second part of the video is the education that's going to be posted in the next video. So make sure that you hit me up if you don't have any head sheets, or you go on Google or find some kind of head sheet that you can print so that you can be prepared for our class on round layers. That's coming up in the next video. Take care, guys.